Hi, everybody. I don't know what today is. I think it's like the 17th, 18th of August in 2025. And I've been wanting to write a book for a very long time. And the name of my book is To Hear the Lions Roar. It is a coming-of-age story about myself, relationships, adventures, things you will not believe, I guarantee it. And Andre came by, talked to me the other day, as he does at times, and reminded me that I needed to write that story. Because if you like the show The Last of Us, which is fictional, I'm going to tell you a true story that's very similar. You won't believe how it ends, and you won't believe the story I'm about to tell you. But I promise you, it is all true. Andre visits on a regular basis. Keeps me focused. Keeps me in touch. I'll be turning 65 pretty soon. And this story starts when I'm 19 years old. I'd been going to vet school, and I realized that being a vet, although as noble as it can get, was just not going to be for me. I couldn't see euthanizing an animal. I couldn't see taking in animals that nobody else wanted to be euthanized. I figured I'd end up with a house of 300 animals. Not that I kind of didn't end up that way anyway, but I don't know. I just felt like there was something waiting for me. Now, you can call that whatever you want, but I've decided to call it fate. So with little thought at all, on a Tuesday after class, I packed up my stuff and I went home. My parents were living in Kernersville at the time, and my dad was a U.S. Marshal, and my mother was a retired educator who worked often for the school board, and sometimes she substituted. She was a Girl Scout leader. She was one of those people that everybody loved. And so is my dad. If you ask anybody from my hometown, they will tell you that they loved my mom and dad. And that's fantastic. And I'm not here to change that. But I will tell you that sometimes wasn't perfect at my house. But we made it through. And it was a good childhood. And I appreciate it very much. And I came home, and my mom said, what are you doing home? And I said, I quit. And she looked at me like this. You can't quit college. Yeah, Mom, I did. I can. And my thought was that I was going to hang around the house, find a job that I loved, and move on with my life. But that kind of all changed when my dad came home. So my dad came home, and probably one of the first times we ever had a conversation that I remember in my life, he said, you can't stay here. You got 1 week, and then you need to go back to school, or you need to get out and get a job. Well, I was pretty devastated because I wasn't expecting that. I was the youngest of 5 children, and I had always been, kind of coddled a little bit. Everybody took care of me, and they still do. They still do. Everybody takes care of me. It took me a long time to learn how to take care of myself. I went to my room. I was upset and I was crying. And I called the one person that was one of my best friends, and that was Raynell. And hey, Raynell. And Raynell said, I just saw an ad that would be perfect for you. Look in the paper. And back then, like everybody had a paper. So I went down and I looked in the wanted ads. And I saw this ad for this guy who was looking for farm help. And it was just him and his wife, and he would provide a place to live and all that. And I thought to myself, wow, I'd be perfect for farm help. I had helped my brother-in-law take care of his cows, worm them. I'd been around horses a good portion of my life in one way or another. And I thought that was what she was talking about, because I just thought, oh, a family. That'll be perfect. I'll have a family. And I could do a job that I love, working on a farm around animals. We are so stupid when we're young that we don't know what we don't know. And that is funny. But I'm going to tell this story the truthful way. And that was exactly what I thought. So I called back Raynell and I was telling her, yeah, you think this guy will hire me? And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, the farm job with the guy. She goes, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Sitting Rock Arabian horse farms. And I was like, what? So I read down a little further, and there's this ad, I think, for Sitting Rock Arabian horse farms. And they're looking for girls, 18 to 25 who want to work with horses. They provide living quarters. They feed you. You get a 2-year education with equine. And I thought, well, yeah, that doesn't sound too bad, but I want a family. I didn't tell her that, but that was kind of my plan, that I would go to this other place and first. So the next morning I got up and, I told my mom that I was going to apply for this one job, and I called over there. I couldn't there was no phone number for the other people. It said show up in person for the family. But Sitting Rock Arabian Horse Farm had a phone number. So I called the phone number, and they set me up for an appointment that day at 10 o'clock. Now I remember, as a matter of fact, it was 3 days before Christmas, 1979. And I thought, well, I'll go. But I really didn't want to miss Christmas, my last Christmas that I thought with my mom and dad. Because, Christmas was Christmas, and I never missed one yet. So I said, okay. And I got dressed in a pair of blue jeans and a plaid wool shirt. And my mom said, you're not wearing that, are you? And I said, listen, this is who I am. Either they're going to hire me as me, or they're not going to hire me. And she said, well, honey, that's not the way. And I waved her off and got in my yellow Gremlin with my little dog Rowdy and drove over towards Madison, North Carolina. It was about maybe an hour from Kernersville, if that. Don't remember exactly, but it wasn't that far. And on the way there, I stopped at the address. And I want to add that this is before Google Maps, so I was actually using a Rand McNally map to find this address, which was no easy feat, because it was just a random rural address. So you had to kind of get in the right area, and then you had to look at mailboxes, basically, and find the right road. And yeah, it took me a little bit, but I found it. And I drove down the driveway, and it was a white house with a white barn behind it, and green roof and green trim. And as I drove up, there were like 8 stalls with maybe 4 or 5 horses hanging their heads out the stall. and no other person in sight. And I went and I knocked on what would have been the back door, and a pleasant lady came to the door, and she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, I'm applying for your farm work job." Now, I was very confident. I knew a lot, and I really felt like I would get this job. Now, you have to picture me at that time. I was 5'1", maybe 105 pounds. So small, very small. Most people thought I was 13 or 14 years old. And she says, "Well, how old are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm 19." And she kind of chuckled. And then she said, "Well, my husband is out back working on the tractor, and he does all the hiring. So you'll have to go talk to him." And she shooed me away. And I walked around the back of the barn, and there was a man laying under a tractor working on it. And I walked up, and he saw my feet, and he kind of peeked out from under the tire. And he smiled, and he said, "Hey, what can I do for you?" And I said, I'm applying for the job." He didn't say anything, but he got real quiet. And he said, "Can you hand me that 5/8" wrench?" And I quickly picked it up and handed it to him. And I thought that would be impressive to him because I knew what a 5/8" wrench was. I remember this like it was yesterday. It's amazing what you remember. And then he did something, and he came out from under the tractor, and he stood up, and he said, well, I'm very pleased to meet you, but see, I'm getting old, and my back's kind of giving out, and I'm really looking for a man who can do some heavy lifting." Well, there it was, a man. Everybody seemed to want a man. My whole life, they wanted a boy or they wanted a man. Like I'd spent my whole childhood trying to be a boy for my dad. And he barely paid me any attention my whole life. So he said, "I'm sorry, you're just not right for the job." I started to say, "I can do it," but the look on his face told me that was not going to work. So, trying not to cry, I got back in the Gremlin, petted my dog, and headed on down to Sitting Rock Arabian Horse Farms. Well, I did cry a little bit. I was so upset and frustrated and mad that my big plan for my family to work on a farm had not worked out. But I didn't want to show up at Sitting Rock Farms looking like I had cried. So I came upon this truck stop, and it was called P&M Truck Stop. And I went in there, and a lot of people looked at me, and I just ignored them. And I went to the ladies' restroom, and I washed my face, and I combed my hair, and I got my composure back, and I went back out, and I asked one of the cashiers or waitresses, I said, "Do you know where Sitting Rock Arabian Horse Farm?" And when I said that, I swear to you, the whole truck stop. Now, this wasn't like a big truck stop, like a Love's truck stop. This was like a little quaint diner. And there were maybe 20 tables in there. And I think when I said, "Do you know where Sitting Rock Arabian Horse Farms is?" like the whole place went silent. And everybody looked at me. And I looked around the room to see why everybody was silent. And they were all looking at me. And they were all kind of smiling. Just a little bit. And I thought, that is weird. And she smiled at me. Biggest smile as she could get. And she said, "Well, yes, hon. You just go out the parking lot and you turn right. And you go right down there to the next paved road on the right." And she said, "You turn down that road, you can't miss it. It's right down that road. Good luck." And I said, "Okay, great." And I headed down that road to Sitting Rock Arabian Horse Farms. That's the first part of my story. And if you like it, let me know. And if you want to hear the second part, and the third part, and the fourth part, and the fifth part, because I'm going to try maybe every day to tell a little bit of this story until I get to the end, then subscribe, please, and help an old lady out. Thanks a bunch. Thanks for listening. Love everybody.